Hi everyone. So today we're going to talk about atoms and molecules and how they are the building blocks of life. So let's get started. So why should we study chemistry and biology? Well, that's because all living things are made up of matter, and matter is anything that takes up space and has mass. And to understand matter, which makes up everything, including living things, we need to understand atoms, which are basically the smallest unit of life. So, what is an atom? Well, an atom is the smallest unit of matter. It makes up all of life. And even an atom is made up of subcomponents called protons, neutrons, and electrons. So, what about the atomic structure? Well, every atom will have protons, which has a positive charge and is in the middle in the nucleus. It also has a neutron, which is has no charge and it's also found in the nucleus. Finally, atoms have electrons, which are negatively charged subcomponents that kind of orbit around the atom or circulate around the atom. They don't necessarily circulate in a perfect way like this. They kind of appear and reappear around the atom or the nucleus. Yeah, and those are every atom looks like this, but differs in how many protons or neutrons or electrons there are. So that's where atomic number and atomic mass comes in. And when we talk about the atomic number, we're talking about how many protons an atom has. So depending on the amount of protons it has, we actually have different names for different elements that are made of those atoms. Um, for instance, this oxygen here has 8 protons, and that's why we call it oxygen. And the atomic number would be 8. We also talk about the atomic mass. And when we talk about the mass of an atom, we're actually talking about protons plus neutrons. How many protons you have, how many neutrons you have. So in this case, if this oxygen 16 has 8 protons and 8 neutrons, then its mass must be 8 plus 8, which makes it 16. Now, even though all of oxygen will have the same number of protons, which is 8, the atomic mass can actually change, meaning the amount of neutrons within the nucleus can actually differ. So oxygen 16 can have 8 neutrons, 17 can have 9, 18 can have 10, and this can change the mass of the atom. And this can also make certain atoms or elements unstable and radioactive. And when an atom has different amounts of neutrons, like you see here, oxygen can have different number of atoms, we actually call it isotopes. These are atoms with different numbers of neutrons, and they're especially helpful when it comes to some elements becoming radioactive because of the unstable or different amount of neutrons they have. So, what are ions? Um, Ions are basically charged to atoms, and this happens when atoms gain or lose electrons. Remember, the electrons around the nucleus are negatively charged, and if an atom gains or loses these electrons, it can become negative or positively charged. When we're talking about a cation, we're talking about an atom losing an electron and becoming positive. For instance, sodium is actually or sodium plus Na plus is a cation, meaning it lost an electron that it had and it's become more positive because it's losing that negative charge. Anions are the opposite. These are negatively charged atoms because they're gaining an electron. And normally, atoms will give away electrons or even share electrons sometimes with other atoms. So cation loses electrons to become positive, and anions gain electrons to become negatively charged. Let's talk about chemical bonds. Atoms bond to become more stable, and there are a couple types of bonds. The first is ionic bond. When we're talking about ionic bonds, remember we said ions are charged particles or charged atoms. Ionic bonds are when two atoms transfer electrons to become charged particles, and that's how they bond, because the positive and negative charge will come together. So in this case, atom 1 will give away an electron to atom 2, and atom 2 will receive an electron, becoming a cation and an anion, positive and negative charge, and they combine to form an ionic bond. There's another way to bond, which is a covalent bond, and this is when atoms are sharing electrons with each other. So, say we have atom one and atom two. Instead of atom one giving away its electron, atom one and atom two are actually sharing an electron. Do you see over here? And this sharing will cause it to bond to each other, and we call this covalent bond. Nothing's being charged, nothing's losing an electron or gaining an electron, but since they need to share. They're going to be combining together to share an electron. Finally, we have hydrogen bonds, which are weak bonds between molecules of hydrogen, and you can see that here. And hydrogen bonds are especially important when it comes to biology, which we'll talk about in the future. So let's talk about molecules and compounds. We talked about atoms, which are the smallest unit of matter. A molecule is basically two or more atoms that are bonded together. So this is an oxygen molecule, which has oxygen atoms bonded together. We call it a compound when we have a molecule, but with different elements, not just one element. This is a molecule because it's just oxygen atoms combined together, but this is a compound because it's an oxygen atom and two hydrogen atoms combined together. So it's two different elements combined together. So bonds break and form new substances during chemical reactions. And normally within these chemical reactions, we have reactants and then we have products. So you can see this is a chemical reaction between CH4 and oxygen O2, CO2, and H2O to turn into CO2 and H2O. And regardless of what chemical your reaction you're having, matter is never lost or destroyed. It just gets rearranged. So this carbon gets rearranged. This carbon, you can see the black is now attached to the red on the product side, and some of the red is attached to the white, which is the hydrogen and the oxygen on the product side. So nothing is lost. It's just rearranged in a chemical reaction. In summary, atoms are building blocks of matter. They're made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. They bond to make different types of molecules, and there are different types of bonds. And chemical reactions drive life processes. And when chemical reactions happen, nothing is lost, no matter is lost, no energy is even lost, but things just get rearranged and transformed. So, what's next? In the next video, we'll talk about water and being the life's most essential molecule. We're talking about why water is so special, how water structure gives it its unique properties, and finally, why life depends on water. That's it. Thank you.